All of this runs on a Raspberry Pi and a bespoke Flutter app installed to a cheap tablet. In this video, I'll be going through exactly how to replicate this setup with a detailed code breakdown and options to take it further. I'm a professional software engineer, so naturally my house needs to reflect that. Unfortunately, I'm not absolutely minted yet, so I can't pay for somebody to come and install a really fancy integrated system, which left me wondering, how can I do that on a budget? After a bit of research, I found that it's certainly possible and certainly not too difficult. I'm going to go through 3 sections. That's the hardware you'll need, the Home Assistant setup, and the Flutter app. If you want to get the source code and some handy documentation to come with it, then check out my Ko-fi page where you can buy it for a small price. Just one more thing before I get started, you don't need the fanciest, newest equipment for this. Just a simple, cheap tablet and a Raspberry Pi, along with a couple of extra peripheral devices. For reference, I use a second-hand Raspberry Pi 4 Model B and a second-hand Lenovo Tablet M8. Both of those came to a total cost of about £100. The first thing you'll need to do is set up the Raspberry Pi with Home Assistant on it, and there's a lot of tutorials for this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. You will need a monitor to set up the Raspberry Pi initially, but then after doing that you can just run it headless, aka without a monitor. All of the Home Assistant functionality can be accessed on a site that's hosted locally on your network. After setting up Home Assistant, make sure to plug in your Zigbee adapter because that makes sure that the Raspberry Pi can communicate with the Zigbee devices. Zigbee is a different type of protocol to Wi-Fi, for example, so you can run your Zigbee devices independent of the Wi-Fi. The first thing you'll see once you access Home Assistant is the dashboard. On the left in the settings menu is where you can add your Zigbee devices. Make sure any devices you want to connect are in pairing mode and simply scan for it by pressing the Add Device button. Once your device is added, in that same page you'll be able to change the properties of that device. For example, here I'm changing the properties of a light bulb. Make sure to give each of your devices a sensible and clear name and entity ID. This is really important because you'll use the entity ID to refer to that device in your app. Now that your devices are set up, you're good to go with creating the app. Flutter is the framework that I've chosen to use for this app because it easily installs onto multiple different types of devices like Apple and Android, while making sure that you only need to maintain one code base. You don't necessarily need Flutter because Home Assistant exposes an API which you can use from any type of programming language. It is completely language agnostic, but that being said, it's what I've used and it's what I've included in the package on my Ko-fi page. As with the Raspberry Pi setup, there's already a ton of tutorials on how to set up Android Studio and Flutter, so I recommend you follow one of those. The general structure of a Flutter app is a set of pages or routes which are filled with widgets. These widgets are manually created interactable or static UI elements which cause a change in state to the app. For example, a button to turn a light on and off would be a widget. A box which has this button and an image to show if the light is on or off would also be a widget. For each device that you have connected to Home Assistant, you'll need a corresponding widget that allows you to change the state of that device. It's really important that your app is synchronized with these device states. You don't want a light switching on but the app thinking that it's still off. In the case of my app, you can see that I have a routes folder and a widgets folder. These are where the pages and widgets for controlling the devices are stored respectively. There's also the Home Assistant script which contains all of my functionality for interacting with the Home Assistant API. And finally, there's the main file which acts as the entry point for the app. The most important part of this whole setup is how Flutter interacts with Home Assistant, so I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to that, and here's your warning, it will get a bit technical. To start with, I've defined a class Home Assistant Service which contains all of the functions for getting information from and assigning information to Home Assistant. I've done this so that this code only needs to be written in one place, which is here. At the top you can see 2 variables. One is the URL for the Home Assistant website, which is the same one you've used to access the dashboard and connect your devices. I find the code tends to work more reliably with the actual IP address of the Raspberry Pi rather than the homeassistant.local URL, and then below that you'll see a token. I've left this blank for the video, but you can create a long-lived access token on your Home Assistant admin settings under the Security tab. This is needed to authenticate with Home Assistant, essentially giving the tablet permission to manipulate Home Assistant without needing to log in. This is a secure token, so make sure to keep it safe. The first function is Get Entities, and this gets all of the entity information for every device connected to Home Assistant. It's used for getting the IDs of each entity in each page of the app. Every time a page loads, All of the entities for all of the rooms are fetched using the getEntities function and then filtered by matching those entity IDs to a list of entity IDs that belong to a specific room. Next, I'll cover the getter functions. These are used to get information about devices on the network. For example, I have one to get the sunrise and sunset, one to get the on and off state of a light, and one to get the color state. These functions are used by corresponding widgets to update the UI on the app. For example, when the light widget loads, it will check the on-off state of the light using getLightState and update the widget to show the user if the light is on or off. Now for the setter functions. These are used to assign values to Home Assistant to update the devices. The functions are generic and take an entity ID and any other information required for that specific operation. For example, the function toggleLight requires the entity ID of a light and a Boolean value stating whether the light should be on or off. Another example is the change bulb color function, which requires the entity of a light and a red, green and blue value. To install the app, you'll need to build it and then put it on your device. You could technically just use USB debugging, but I don't recommend that really, even for personal use. So that's all for my smart home setup. You'll be able to easily add more widgets and functionality just by adding more Flutter code. And I do recommend that you stick to the same structure that I've got set up in place already. Thanks for watching.